He introduced the course system, pioneered the use of artillery, rapid troop movements, and the concept of concentration of force.
It was going so well. Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars channel, where the beard is still in residence. It will stay for a little while, but it is coming off. It's starting to get itchy and getting on my nerves. Feel free to make recommendations on beard oil. I'm all ears. Today we're back with another Napoleonic reaction video. Hopefully you enjoyed the last one. If not, go and check the previous installment of the series where I critiqued Rude Boy Brody. I gave him a 6 or a 6.5 out of 10 for that one. I could see where he was going. I liked some of the points made. So we're going to do another one, see what we can make of this one. This is from York Business. It is entitled Napoleon Was the Greatest General Ever. I'm always ever so slightly wary about kind of sticking these people on pedestals and going they were the greatest, because it's opinion, it's judgment. I mean, if you have that opinion, then happy days, knock yourself out. That's the point of the discussion. That's why I'm loving these shorts that are coming out, where they're kind of getting people engaged and they're getting talking about history. Was he the greatest general ever? That's a big topic of discussion. I haven't got time to do that properly now. But we're going to see what York Business has produced, and let's see how well it holds up against the history.
Napoleon Bonaparte, possibly the greatest military commander ever. He started as a humble artillery officer in 1785. 15 years later, he was the absolute leader of France.
Okay, yeah. So far, this is starting really well. Absolutely right. He was from minor aristocracy, so he didn't. Everybody's like seen the Ridley Scott trailer, film posters, right, where he goes, he came from nothing, he conquered everything. Well, no, he came from minor nobility. His family were well off within Corsica, but obviously Corsica's a very kind of, it only just become part of France when Napoleon was born. His dad kind of ingratiated himself with the French government rather than supporting Corsican independence like he had done previously. And he took advantage of the fact that one of the perks of that was that he could send his sons off to military academy. So he sends Napoleon off to military academy. Napoleon wasn't particularly popular with his classmates because he was ultra intense, and he was obsessed, ironically, and this is the big irony and the question mark of whether or not Napoleon had daddy issues. Napoleon was obsessed with the idea of Corsican independence that his dad had walked away from. Well, at that point in his life. So yeah, this is good so far. I'm liking it. Technically, it's 1804 when he becomes full absolute monarch, but he becomes first consul in 1799. So you can kind of see where they're going with it. Consul for life in 1801. I'll go with it. The basic point stands. I've got to say the AI generated images aren't bad either. So I'm liking this so far. Let's hope it stays this way.
His greatest ability, inspiring troops, and turning seemingly impossible situations into victories. Out of the 86 battles...
Yeah, this is great. I'm on board. One of Napoleon's most incredible skills was getting people fired up, without question. His men absolutely loved him because he knew how to inspire his soldiers to get the most out of them. We've got that famous thing of him going up to people and tugging their earlobes. Just kind of being willing to stand around campfires and talk to them. There's one story, it may or may not be true, of a guy who falls asleep at his post while he's on sentry duty, and Napoleon stands guard and lets, I think it's a corporal, lets the corporal sleep. So there's loads of these stories. Napoleon was really good with propaganda as well. He does this especially well in northern Italy in the 1790s when he takes command of the French army out there, which had become massively demoralized, and he turns them into this amazing fighting force. So I'm liking this. Let's have more, please.
He led his army. He was victorious 75 times.
The numbers are always disputed. For every video that I see a different number of estimates. So I'm not going to sit here and nitpick about what does and doesn't count, because the basic point is he was very successful. He lost some of the major ones, obviously Battle of Leipzig, Waterloo being the obvious ones that everyone remembers. But yeah, he was massively gifted. probably better on the battlefield than he was on campaign. Napoleon's style was all about kind of like a spider's web style of starting an engagement with a small number of forces, kind of spreading his forces out over a much wider area. I'm going to talk about this in a minute, actually. Spreading his forces out over a wider area, and then finding the enemy, and then bringing the rest of those forces back together. So yeah, really successful. I'm liking this. Let's hope there's more.
He took on kingdoms and empires by the handful, sometimes fighting 6 armies at a time.
Yeah, sort of. So I just mentioned Leipzig. At the Battle of Leipzig, which is also known as the Battle of the Nations, because so many different nations are involved, he's facing forces from Russia, Prussia, Austria, Saxony, Sweden, Württemberg. So sure, he did fight 6 nations at once. Technically, there's a British contingent in there as well, so that's sort of 7, but the British contingent is just, it's tiny, it's meaningless. Most of the time, so you've got the British flag on there, the Spanish flag. I mean, most of the time, the British, Spanish, and Portuguese, and I'm being a bit picky here, but geography does sort of matter. When he's fighting, he's not actually fighting those forces in person, British, Spain, and Portugal. He leaves that to other commanders because they're at one end of the continent fighting in Spain and Portugal, and then he's at the other end, whether it's in sort of Czechoslovakia or on into Poland and Russia itself, where he's fighting, whether it's Austrians, Prussians, Russians, at the other end. So he didn't personally fight all of them at once, but I'm being a bit pedantic here, so I can go with the point.
He introduced the course system, pioneered the use of artillery, rapid troop movements, and the concept of concentration of force.
It was going so well. So Napoleon didn't introduce the course. He didn't invent the course system. This is one of those popular myths that's on the internet. If you Google who invented the course system, it will come up with Napoleon. It's wrong. The internet is lying to you. The core system is something that is kind of brought about by French military thinkers that he's reading when he's at military academy. People like Guibert and Bossuet. Napoleon takes those ideas and makes them absolutely fly. This is what I was talking about earlier, about that kind of spiderweb network. So he divides the armies up into corps. That's an idea that's been around a little while. It's not his idea, so he doesn't invent the corps system, but he does make it work that much better, because by dividing his armies up into corps, he makes sure that they can sustain themselves if they make contact with the enemy. They've got the artillery, the cavalry, and the infantry to just be able to hold their own for a few hours. Why is that important? Because what it means is you don't have to have your entire army on 1 or 2 main roads in very close proximity to one another. You can spread your army out and make them a much more threatening prospect. And this is what I mean about the spider's web, because when one corps snags, like the little threads on a spider's web, snags the enemy, they can then stand and fight, send out runners and riders to the other forces and go, we've made contact, we need backup. And then all of these other forces swoop in. And so what you have is these kind of seat of your pants battles that are incredible in terms of the excitement. It's also incredibly effective, and it also means that Napoleon's able to sort of march separated, fight concentrated. Works ridiculously well, but he develops and makes the system fly. He doesn't invent it. So no, he didn't introduce the core system, which is a shame, because this video was going really well. I was a bit confused about pioneered the use of artillery and the concentration of force. I've talked already about, kind of march separated, fight combined. I mean, Napoleon's all about the decisive engagement. He's willing to shatter armies. He's willing to take those risks and risk more in the process in order to try and get that sort of overwhelming victory. That means that he's more effective in terms of the use of movement. He's willing to kind of arc around people's rears, turn their flanks. During the Italian campaign, he's known as the Italian whirlwind for his ability to march, strike, pivot, turn, strike again, and keep hammering the Austrians in northern Italy so that they literally do not know where he's coming from next. So he's insanely gifted at that. And that was different. But but pioneered the use of artillery. I mean, artillery's been around an easy couple of hundred, maybe even 400 years by this point, by the 1800s. So obviously he wasn't the first person to ever use artillery. Uses it differently. So we've got the whole kind of grand battery thing. But the grand battery thing isn't entirely new. So I think they're kind of referring to him being more innovative in the use of artillery. Napoleon loved artillery. He was an artillery officer. He was gonna love artillery, wasn't he? So I'm not quite sure where that's going with that, but I can kind of see the point that's being made. So I'm not going to hammer these guys too hard for that.
His campaigns were not merely acts of conquest, but acts of liberation, dismantling oppressive monarchies and giving.
All right, I'll hear this one out before I comment.
Rise to republics founded on the principles of freedom and equality.
Right. This is the generous view of Napoleon, put it that way. Not oppressive. Sure, in some respects, he did dismantle monarchies and set up new principalities, usually under the control of his own family members. There was a lot, for all that we talk about, Napoleon was kind of egalitarian. He would promote people based on ability. Actually, there's a lot of cronyism going on, particularly when it comes to monarchies during this period. So let's take Spain as the ultimate example of this. Spain literally gets stabbed in the back. Had been an ally of Napoleon, a very reluctant ally by 1808, it has to be said, but nonetheless an ally all the same. And Napoleon basically hoodwinks the Spanish royal family into coming to France to settle their differences. There's a rivalry that breaks out between the king, Carlos IV, and the heir, Ferdinand VII. He basically brings them all to France, sits them down under the pretense of, we're going to settle these differences because it's not good for you guys to be fighting. It creates instability in Spain, and I don't want that. And then he places them under arrest and sticks his brother on the throne of Spain. So he's not all that benevolent. There's the story of Portugal in there as well. Napoleon invades Portugal because, as a free nation, they decide that they don't want to do what Napoleon tells them when he says, you're going to stop trading with Britain. So when they go, thanks for the thought, but nah, we're gonna run our own economic affairs our own way. Thank you very much for the thought. He goes, well, you can either do what I say or I'm going to invade you. Eventually, actually, the Portuguese cave in and he invades them anyway. So there is definitely a point to be made that, yes, he does reform Europe. Europe cannot be the same, particularly in kind of Central Europe, in the region of modern day Germany. Europe cannot be the same after Napoleon's gone in and reorganized things. So yes, there is a point there, but Napoleon is fundamentally a dictator. So there is an oppression involved in being a dictator. We talked in another video, I talked about censorship. Napoleon's big on censorship, big on the secret police. So I don't entirely buy this idea that I'm not saying he's a tyrant, and believe me, I'm not saying that he was like Hitler or something. He really wasn't. And the people who compare Napoleon and Hitler need to pick up a book, because honestly, the comparisons are so shallow and so ineffective that it doesn't work. Napoleon is not Hitler. He's not that much of an arsehole. I'm not a fan of Napoleon, and I'll hold my hands up to that. But I do think there are some benefits to his rule. We've got it on the screen right now. The Code Napoleon is massive for France because it takes this stupidly diverse set of rules within France, where in different parts of the country you will pay different rates of tax just because you're born in a different part of the country. So it was a crazy system. It needed unifying. The Code Napoleon was brilliant in doing that. But freedom and equality, not if you were a woman, because his Napoleonic Code removes the rights that women had gained during the French Revolution, which is a problem because it literally affects half the population of France. And it creates this massive patriarchal system that isn't that unusual for the 19th century, but it was a step backwards. So the French Revolution had gone further, and then because of Napoleon's reforms actually women were worse off, and it meant that they were basically completely dependent on their men for most legal decisions. Women were almost property. They could do very little without the say-so of their husband or their father. All of their possessions fundamentally belonged to the husband when they got married. So even if you had your own wealth, it became your husband's. Very hard to get divorces. It was all incredibly complex. He also reintroduced slavery in the French Empire, which had been abolished during the Revolution. So let's not get too carried away with the whole kind of Vive l'Empereur, wasn't he amazing, and a positive force. In some respects positive, in a lot of other respects not. He's complex, right? I mean, look, it's the 19th century. Most people in this period are really complex people, and they've got some good things about them that we can admire, and they've got some bad things about them that it's okay for us to go, actually, I'm not okay with that. But that's history. That's these people. And what we've got to do as people looking back on the past is decide what are we okay with, what aren't we okay with, and how do we feel as a result at the end of all of that. So these are some good points that are made, but I'm just here kind of offering the other side of the perspective, I guess. And it's for you to decide. Look, post in the comments. This is what the whole point of these videos are for. What's your take? There isn't a right or a wrong way to remember Napoleon. I've got my opinion. You've heard that. You might disagree. That's cool. That's about us taking different bits of evidence and deciding what we put more emphasis on and what we put less emphasis on. That's history. So let's see what else we've got to hear here.
His ascent represented the triumph of merit over birth, ambition over adversity, and the unwavering belief in the ability of a single individual to shape the course of history.
Yeah, no arguments here. No one can deny that he was massively talented, one of the most driven people to ever become the ruler of a nation. There's a reason that we call it the Napoleonic era. I mean, look, this show is called the Napoleonic Wars channel. He dominated, and there's a reason for that. Because he was gifted, he was driven, and he had the ability to push through his ideas. So he did. Generally, I'd say this video is pretty good. It's a little bit too generous for me personally, but I'd be the first to acknowledge that that's partly my opinion on the guy. There are some important caveats that I think need to be added when we discuss his rule, but let's be fair, this is a 60-second short, and I've just waffled on for what, 17 minutes on how complicated the history really is. Again, it's decent music in the background. I said already, nice AI generated images. So I like what you're trying to do here. I'm going to say 7.5 or an 8 out of 10. I generally like it. There's some problems, but good stuff all around. So that's going to wrap up this one for today. If you enjoyed the video, remember to drop a like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you can find your way back. This is a series. There are going to be more reaction videos from me on others over the next few weeks. If you'd like to know more about the plans for this show, head over to patreon.com, where we have some massively exciting developments. There is a whole podcast, the Napoleonic Wars podcast, where you can hear much more of this. Obviously, it's all audio form, but never mind. There are literally thousands of hours of content, about 200 episodes over there that you can enjoy. So go have a listen. I talk to leading historians of the period a lot, ask them about their research, get some really interesting takes on different parts of the period. So if you like the period, go check out the podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. The Napoleonic Wars podcast does what it says on the tin. Not very imaginative a title, but you get the idea. And if you'd like to immerse yourself in a wider world, if you'd like to support the show, because I'm off to film very soon some cracking documentaries that are going to go out on the YouTube channel. You can support that work either via Ko-fi, link in the description, or on Patreon. Again, link in the description, go find out more. That's it for the shameless plug for this one. It's been a joy to have you. Thanks for sticking around. I've been Zack White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars channel. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and thank you for watching.